thank you very much for joining us for this panel. One I'm actually really excited about. ESG is going to be a very big area upcoming for the industry, and I'm delighted to get my panelists' thoughts on this. We have a wealth of experience and expertise across the panel. If you would like to introduce yourselves, Priya, starting with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be on this panel. I'm the VP for Business Development for OpenX, and across all of Asia, including India. And I look after both sides of the business, so that includes demand and supply both. Sustainability has really been a big topic for OpenX. So, we have considered sustainability to be one of our top goals, and since 2018. And I'm very proud to announce that we are the only certified carbon neutral ad exchange in the world. So that makes us very forward thinking when it comes to sustainability.
Laura.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Cantor. You can see ex-Food Panda, so I literally left my job last week, but agreed to still come and join the panel, so I'm just in between roles right now. But I spent the last 6 years leading marketing and sustainability at Food Panda Singapore.
My name's Sam, and very simply, I'm the Managing Director of TEEDS in Southeast Asia.
Hi, Dominic Powers from Dentsu. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for Asia Pacific, so covering all markets excluding Japan, based here in Singapore.
Thank you all very much for joining us. I think the first thing I really want to establish is the importance of ESG to our industry, particularly in this region, just how people feel about it. So Sam, how are you seeing the ESG situation here?
Yeah, sure. So just bear with me because my voice is falling off slightly from talking to so many of you yesterday. So I think we all know there's a huge amount of work to be done. I think the good thing from our perspective is that when we bring products to market, usually they resonate with certain agencies, certain brands, certain verticals. Something that's been very apparent for the past kind of 12 months is everyone now has a message on sustainability. An initiative, they obviously vary vastly. So it's becoming important. It's obviously nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of the importance to the environment and socially, obviously, as well. So, but it's not really, I don't think anyone's fault. There are two main reasons for that. Firstly, in kind of quantifying the challenges that we have in front of us. So I think it's very easy for us all to understand how aviation or the auto industry hurts the environment. We've all grown up with it, we understand it, it makes sense. So I asked our sustainability lead, Benjamin, like, how do you quantify that to the layman, so myself included? And he said, 1 million impressions is roughly a ton of carbon emissions, which is a flight from Singapore to Hong Kong. So if you put that into perspective, it's very much easier for people to understand. And the second thing is the lack of consensus. So that stat I just gave you to someone else means nothing, right? So that's from one person's perspective, and there's much more work that needs to be done to kind of clarify that. From our perspective as TEEDS, we see our role in first working out what we can do better. So optimizing our data centers, our network infrastructures, our ad formats, while still delivering on media KPIs.
Cool. Laura, is that something that resonates with you in terms of how the industry's seen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess something to add, I would say when we look at marketing and sustainability as well, is not just the emissions that you might produce or looking at, the servers and the impact, but also as an ad network, what are the brands that you're pushing and what are the products that you're also selling? I think it can become like a very complex topic as well. But one thing that I really thought about and wanted sort of to share while doing the panel is really looking at more on this kind of way that we use marketing, because ultimately marketing, we're there to sell as much as we can to as many people and as often as possible. And I think in many ways that's going completely against, trying to reduce, emissions, your impact on the environment. So I think for me, that's a bigger topic and a more challenging one to address.
Yeah, I think we're going to come to that in a few questions' time. I think we'll have a lot to cover on that ground in terms of our responsibility. Dom, we are at Dentsu, who have a history in this area. How are you seeing the attitude to ESG across APAC?
Sure. I think what we see as an organization that's been looking at social impact for all of our 120-year history is there is a big gap that we see in the value action gap. So you have a lot of brands, a lot of organizations that have their value statements about what they're trying to do around sustainability, around social impact in general, but it's very difficult for them to translate that, if they're a global company in particular, into the local markets, because there aren't the systems in place. There aren't the infrastructure pieces in place to enable us to understand how big is this as a problem. And so before we can address it, we've got to understand how big is that carbon footprint? How do we measure it? So while we look at ourselves as an industry and as individuals, we don't yet have a standard way to measure what that is. And Dentsu has been doing some work with the University of Bristol in the UK to work on a carbon calculator. And that was some of the foundational work for the industry that happened about 2 years ago. And we're in the process now of launching our own calculator with using available data from the scientific and academies that we can then understand at least what that footprint is. Then once we understand that, we can start dealing with it. But I think what's also important for brands and companies like ourselves to understand is really, if we don't do this, there is going to be a negative financial impact to our business. So it's no longer about doing something to feel good. It's doing something because you may not have a business if you don't. And so when you think about how consumers think about the brands they interact with, our own research has shown that 65% of consumers will consider to change a favorite brand if they don't believe they're taking actual real action against social impact. So whether that's sustainability or whether it's doing the right things in the markets they're in. So these discussions are great because we have to have them, but I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of action. And so just to give you a sense of how important that is to Dentsu, we were one of the first 8 companies globally, and we're not talking advertising networks or technology companies, but one of the first 8 companies globally to have our own net zero targets verified by the Science Based Target Initiative, so fully validated and audited. And we hit our 2030 target last week. So we are now the only agency network that is carbon neutral around the world. 136 of 145 offices run on 100% sustainable energy. We make a choice for that. So there's a lot, I think, that the industry can do at the base level, looking inside. But without getting too technical, we have what we call our own Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. Those are the things that directly impact our business. But our Scope 3 are things in the supply chain that we operate in that are also emissions that we have to think about. And as an industry, to your point, what we do is Scope 3 to all the businesses that we work with, all the brands we support. And so us getting our house in order is going to become more and more important as companies have to report. You look to SGX here, all directors now have to go on a sustainability and social impact course. It's mandated. On the bourses in Europe, companies now have to report their emissions as part of their quarterly reports. So us getting our house in order is an imperative now for our clients as well. So it's just a massive, massive issue that we need to be moving faster on.
I think that's a really interesting point about the directors who are taking ESG courses and undergoing training. And I'd like to ask a little bit about where the responsibility does lie in our industry for ESG. Priya, first carbon neutral ad exchange. Where do you feel responsibility lies across our industry?
So I feel that the responsibility lies with each one of us. So it's doesn't matter the size of the company. It could be a large corporate, it could be an airline, or it could be smaller, mid-sized companies in the digital advertising space. Everybody has to take responsibility. There are a few things that all of us need to do, starting with measurement. It's one of the important things. We need to understand what's our carbon footprint to start with. What are the factors that are actually contributing and could be some of the big, contributors like, for instance, data storage. It is one of the biggest culprits for our carbon footprint. So we, OpenX as a company, we migrated our entire exchange to Google Cloud Platform in 2018. And this was actually a very calculated decision because GCP had the greatest environmental factors, and it was why we chose them. and that has helped us significantly reduce our carbon emissions. Since the last few years. So that was our starting point. And since then, we've done a lot around sustainability, verification, which is, again, a big thing in the industry. We all need to consider third-party verification and setting standards, which has not been done yet. So not just claiming to, buy a few offsets here and there, but we need to get verified. And OpenX went ahead and got verified by SBTi as well, Science-Based Targets Initiative. We're net zero. We've also done a lot in terms of carbon reduction and not just offsets. So that helps because we're not just, going and buying our way out of offsets and contributing to carbon emissions, but what we're trying to do is reduce it significantly, so we're not creating a lot of emissions. So that's important as well in terms of what kind of offsets we buy, because there are a lot of high quality and low quality offsets that are available through some of the companies in the world. So we need to understand this more deeply, at a deeper level of how do we make a difference and not just claim to do so.
Yeah, Laura, you made a point earlier on about where the responsibility lies in terms of choosing with who you work, choosing the kind of companies. How possible is that, and how have you seen that in action?
I think just to add on to Priya's point, I agree. I think it's with everyone, and I think even as a consumer as well, there's obviously a responsibility when looking even at the products you're buying. If you can buy something for $1, then maybe that's probably not worth purchasing, and you can look at the supply chain or maybe the people that have created the garment or the items. So I think the reality is that it's possible, but it's difficult. And maybe just to share some experiences from when I was at Food Panda, we did a lot of case studies as well, and we had really interesting focus groups where we would, obviously be able to watch in real time the conversations that people were having, and obviously talking about sustainability. And it was very clear to them, they saw that, Food Panda was really, really ahead of the game in terms of the policies and the, cutlery and banning shark fin and the products that we sold. And they knew that compared to the other brands that we were much further ahead, and they liked us as a brand better. But then when you asked, okay, so would you order from this other brand if they had a sale? And the answer was, yeah, of course we would. So I think it's possible, and I think to Dominic's point, many brands or businesses may lose out if they don't make the efforts. But I think for now sometimes it can come at a business cost as well. So I do think as consumers there's a big responsibility. But finally, governments for sure have a huge part to play, and I think can do more, can enforce more regulations as well that businesses should follow.
What do you think on that, Sam?
Yeah, so the cost impact is something that we all need to take responsibility for. So if you think about the ways that you typically can decrease, so talking about emissions as an example, or energy consumption, is to remove things like or have less heavy ads to reduce the amount of impressions that you're running. Some of those things can go against the core values of what Teads are about, right? Creativity has been at the core of our business since its inception. To then go out and tell clients that you should think about being perhaps less creative, it doesn't work for us, right? So you need to think about that impact, potential impact when it comes to revenue. But actually then there's a challenge, right? And particularly to any of the creative agencies in this room and particularly for us, we have our own studio that builds in-house. How can you be creative whilst still making a difference in that? And so those are the sorts of challenges that we have, but we have to accept the fact that it's not always going to be to our benefit. There's a broader benefit that we all need to take account of.
Maybe I could just add, and I love this quote from the founder of Friends of the Earth, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. So you have no choice because none of us will have jobs if the planet dies. And to your point, I think there are some good technologies out there that we've tried that don't limit the creativity. And I think I can just see Tom sitting there from Seeing This, which is a great technology which we use for our client Tiger, which allows an ad to be streamed as opposed to be served. And through the campaign we did for them, and I'm not going to try and remember all the stats, but we basically reduced the emissions so much that it was enough to drive a Mini around the world 10 times. Just by moving from serving a full ad to streaming the ad in. Because if somebody it doesn't load fully. So if somebody wants to scroll away and doesn't see it, the ad doesn't load, so you don't have wastage as well. So you're saving all of that. So there are ways to look at it now and ways to make a real impact straight away. But I think to your point, we have to start measuring. And there has to be agreement around the standards for measurement. And I think that's the important first step. And I don't think we can wait in Asia for some global organizations to tell us what to do. We have to take steps in Asia because the drivers of everything that pushes emissions for us are completely different to North America or Europe. How a country generates its electricity, coal versus solar versus wind, all the countries are different. We don't have that one standard, so we've really got to work hard.
Is on that point, in terms of what is here in terms of standards and what goals are across APAC, you know, there's AdNet Zero, which sets the targets to be carbon neutral by 2030. Is that a realistic target for companies here? Is there still more work to do, or is 2030 something that is possible, do you think, Priya?
Definitely. I mean, it is possible if it's made a priority. So number one is making this a priority. I mean, we as a company, we did that very quickly. Within 4 to 5 years, we're net zero today, much before our target line. So I'm sure that other businesses can do this as well, because to be honest, as you know, we calculated one campaign contributes to a ton load of carbon emissions. So, and in fact, we're in digital advertising. We can use media to influence consumers at that level, to influence, you know, other partners within the industry. And brands are doing that. They're using advertising today to get their message across to their consumers. So we should be doing the same. Absolutely.
Do you see that, Laura, that, you know, there's a responsibility in the ad industry to not only alter themselves, but to actually spread the message? It's what we're in the business of.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just kind of thinking there when you asked the question, 2030 seems like still quite a long way away. Like I think, you know, when a lot of businesses set these targets, I think they didn't really understand the problem either. So they're kind of these arbitrary numbers. And I think also just something on the carbon offset, which I think is quite important that you were sharing. But if anyone likes John Oliver, there's a really good YouTube video he did on this like 2 weeks ago maybe, but also showing that there's this huge industry now around offsetting, which is not beneficial for the environment either. So I think, again, with these targets, I'm sure everyone will be able to achieve them, but maybe the impact won't necessarily be as positive.
Yeah, do you see that as well, Sam?
Yeah, so to that point, in terms of working out where it all ends is the challenge. There's a topic that's quite prevalent in Europe in particular at the moment around advertising emissions. So we can spend all of this time understanding our ecosystem, looking at our data centers, looking at and measuring our campaigns, but should we then be thinking about the impact that the sales that we drive through our advertising has on things? I mean, it really is a can of worms that we just don't know where it's going to end necessarily. So that's really the challenge for us and for all businesses as well. And those are very nuanced, obviously, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah,
I mean, if I could just jump in, and I think for me this was really telling. There's more people outside than there are inside. So how important is the topic to the industry? And that's the thing we have to fundamentally address, is the apathy towards it.
I think that leads on to a question that's a bit more outward looking. We've talked a lot about what we're doing, what can be done in-house, how the industry can change itself. Does the ad industry have a terrible reputation in terms of this? How do you think, first of all, that the wider world sees the ad industry and their responsibility for things? Is it something that we also need to start communicating better in terms of what the industry is doing? Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think it comes around to what I shared earlier. I think in terms of the advertising and marketing industry, it's about selling and kind of creating this huge culture of consumerism and sales. And I think especially in Asia, it was the first thing I noticed when I got here, this like 9, 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, 12. Any excuse to buy something, and especially in the e-commerce industry in particular, you want something, you want it now, you don't want to wait. So I think for sure there is potentially a responsibility that the ad industry has done to this, but I guess it's tricky, and I think like Sam was sharing, if you have a client that comes in with a huge brief, are you going to turn it down? If maybe ethically it's not a great brand. I think it's difficult when then your competitor maybe will take that money. So I can imagine it's very difficult, and I think with potentially like a recession coming next year or a lot of uncertainty, and with COVID, I think businesses have really struggled as well. I don't think the reputation is terrible. I think in general it still has a very fun and sexy reputation, but maybe not really being seen as spearheading, sustainability. But as you say, I think there's a huge amount of potential, and I think advertising people are great at messages and communication. So I think definitely something that they can focus on in the future.
Yeah, Priya, do you see that as well?
I don't think there's a bad reputation, but we need to do a bit more, and we have the power of advertising, so we can use that. And a lot of brands have started to do that, H&M, as an example, they launched a recycling campaign where they got people to come in and hand over their old clothes, and they've, repaired those clothes, made people reuse them, and now they're recycling them into new products. I think that's a great initiative by a brand. It reduces wastage, and it's kind of making the consumers think, why buy or why create something new when you could actually refurbish and get something out there. So consumers have started to think the same way as well. Like I had a baby recently, and it's not that I couldn't afford getting something for her, but I was like, why should I waste? Let me just get something from my friends and use it for her and just reduce wastage.
Yeah, Sam, in terms of T's experience in the ad industry reputation, how do you see that? How do you manage that?
So I think something to be mindful of is talking about the industry as a whole. Actually, in this space is probably the one place where traditional media is actually much more measured, much more measurable, and actually much further ahead. I think digital media is the side that actually has a lot more to do in that space. But if you think about consumers and how they actually think about these things, I mean, we can sit here and talk about data centers and optimizing networks. They don't think about that. They think about, does your brand care? And do they do something? So there's a huge amount that we can talk about in this room that's going on behind the scenes, but ultimately you then need to be forward-facing, obviously being aware of all of the internet trolls looking for greenwashing and pulling you up at every opportunity. But there's two sides to that coin that both need to be addressed. And we obviously face brands, face consumers via our clients. And so there's a huge job to be done there, particularly around productizing these sorts of things to make them digestible for our brands and for consumers.
Dom?
And I think there is actually one step further we can go. And obviously we talk about net zero targets, reducing emissions, but ultimately we have to be regenerative in what we do. Just cutting emissions is not enough. And there are some companies out there, and there's one actually that was founded in Singapore by two environmentalists, PhD and professors actually, called Handprint, which if you're working with e-commerce companies, it's an amazing concept, amazing idea that they insert themselves into the final transaction, and a brand can choose a social impact project that they can then put a percentage of their sale towards, and those projects are from across Asia Pacific. So it's a very small thing in there. But all of the projects that are in there, it's like replanting mangroves in Indonesia, everything that's trying to be regenerative, for example. So I think as an organization, just those baby steps, if we could get all of the e-commerce companies for 9.9, 11.11, whatever one it is, just drop that in. And all of a sudden, I think we'd make a massive impact, not only to our industry, but consumers would be aware of what's happening and what the industry as a whole is trying to do and what kind of initiatives need to be undertaken. So we can take action now, and it's got to be done quickly.
I just add on another supporter of Handprint, because Laura and I both have experience working with them. So Tees Care, one of our first initiatives, we've got a banner outside on that, so a few questions around that, is our first foray into kind of this space in terms of that productizing I was talking about. So what we do with Teeds Care is very simply allow brands to donate up to 10% of their ad spend to an NGO of their choosing. Handprint actually are very good at helping to identify those that align to the brand. Teeds then match that 10%, so there's a 20% that's delivered that way. And the best part is that there's then this real-time calculator, obviously, that you can actually measure that impact. So again, thinking about marketers, KPIs, that's a real output, right? You need to simplify it in a lot of terms because people are like unsure of this space. They don't understand it necessarily, so making that navigable is important. Our first was actually with Laura and Food Panda. They do a huge amount in this space and will continue to do, obviously, I'm sure, now that Laura's moved on. But that's really our first foray into that space. And then the second piece is around the carbon emissions piece. We've talked a lot about that, obviously, but we've partnered with another great tech business, Impact Plus, to be able to measure the impact of campaigns around a variety of sustainability and emissions targets. So we're actually about to launch or announce a partnership with OMG. We've got 8 of their clients. We're looking at their campaigns as they are right now. And we'll then start the journey around what that means. Because at the minute, it's that measurement that Priya was talking about, looking at what it means in the first instance, then understanding how we can improve it, going on a little bit of a journey with them to reduce that in the long term.
I think I just want to make a point here. It's also not just looking at what we do within the organization, but also in the supply chain. So we need to start influencing, like we work with publishers, so we need to start influencing them and kind of take them down that path on how to reduce their emissions, because that impacts our business and everybody's business, in the industry. So it's all of us have to start thinking about it, and not just a few.
Laura, Sam mentioned that you work with Teeds on Food Panda and Teeds Care. Any experience from that, or any other examples of ESG good practice in the industry to finish the discussion?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned Handprint. So yeah, this definitely came out from obviously discussions with Teeds and the team, but also for us as a business. Everything we do in the sustainability space is all about impact and measuring impact. And I think something that Handprint does really well is the causes are all aligned with the SDGs. So you won't necessarily be donating money to a charity and you don't know where the money's going, or is it just going to, the management team in that NGO, but really it's measurable impact. So I don't know the numbers because I left last week, my team's there, I'll ask them later, but we partnered with Water Roam in Myanmar. So we will know by the end of the campaign, we were able to donate X amount of water and the number of families impacted. So I think as a tool, it's fantastic. And obviously from a marketing spend, it's a small amount of money, but the fact that Teeds Care match it, then it obviously doubles the impact. So it was something that I did propose that for every campaign, we should always use Handprint and donate. But I think because we can measure the impact, it's much easier to justify the ROI and actually justify the spends moving forward.
Yeah, and well, sorry, we've come to a close, but I think we've had a good discussion in terms of a couple of bases covered. We've had the cautionary tale. The ad industry is responsible still for 2% of global carbon emissions, which obviously needs to change. But also, it's been really good to hear that positive steps are being made, and also that people are fully aware that so much more needs to be done. And I look forward to revisiting this discussion back here next time. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for yours.
Thank you.